Hello, Donna here. Welcome to my channel, Transcending Trauma, Speaking to Solutions. So I'm looking at my weird face. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that complex trauma births, which include emotional dysregulation, and about like what it does to the brain, complex trauma, and which often entails chronic trauma, ongoing trauma, like where domestic violence, where you live through a situation that's, not just a one-time hit to the nervous system. It's, hit after hit or hit. And, like what happens to the brain and the nervous system. And just also like trying to see some of the beauty in it, but really just on here trying to teach understanding. So the brain has it has many parts. It has the primal, the brain stem, the prefrontal cortex, the front reasoning and logical part of the mind. It doesn't come on fully until around age 25. Like we have some reasoning and logic when we're younger, but it's not fully online, that part of the brain, until age 25. So, and then we have the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about emotional dysregulation, which is what you'll see someone experience when they go through a trigger. And because the nervous system is so highly reactive after living through abuse, triggers can be, I see it happen at work in certain people. Like, it's weird because I remember when I used to get really dysregulated all the time, I felt that height. The amygdala feels the height of what you're feeling. So if someone tries to tell you it's not as big of a deal as you're making it, you don't feel that. Your brain is feeling all of the emotions. So what happens is, in a brain that had the opportunity to develop the way it should, the prefrontal cortex takes in information first. It hits that part of the brain. It slows it down. It goes through the front cortex for the reasoning and logic, and then it hits the amygdala for the emotional context. Well, after you've lived through ongoing trauma, again, it makes sense. Like the brain does maladaptive things for a good cause, for a good reason, for a protective mechanism. When you've lived through ongoing trauma, the prefrontal cortex shrinks. Like who has time to reflect? Who has time for reasoning and logic when you're in like a fight or flight situation? The information goes straight to the amygdala for the emotional context. Why? Because the emotional context is what makes us fight or flight or freeze or fawn. It makes us take those trauma responses, which are for survival. So, like, ain't nobody got no time to sit here and introspect when they're in dire, like, survival mode. So it's a protective mechanism. It's a beautiful protective mechanism. It sends the data straight to the amygdala for quick survival action, But you can see how, like, once you're out of those kind of dire survival need situations, and hopefully you are, I feel them tugging at me all the time, those those excuses for people that are behaving in ways that I know is not good for me, not good for me to connect with, people that, minimize and create a lot of shame, or, all the things that come with people that are stuck in toxic ways, But so see how it makes sense that the brain would send it straight to the amygdala. And so then, like, emotional dysregulation, that's when their emotions get dysregulated. You could see how that could happen too, because there's no reasoning and logic. So remember, when does the brain come fully in line for reasoning and logic? Age 25. So we can often see children having temper tantrums. Well, someone that's lived through, complex trauma often looks like a child having a temper tantrum because they don't have that emotion or that slowing down, that logical reasoning, and it's going straight to the amygdala, just like a child, because that part of the brain is underdeveloped. So it's not, that prefrontal cortex is not online. It's like a child. And so to try to sort of remember, like when you're dealing with someone they can call them emotional flashbacks when they get dysregulated. Remember also that someone can have different states, like in different situations, they can use more logic and reasoning. But when something triggers, then that information triggers same old, like this trigger. It means it's something activated that reminded the person of the trauma. So it's no longer going to go through the frontal cortex. It's going to go straight to that amygdala because we have to react fast. We don't got no time for that introspection. We need to react. So that's what a trigger does, an emotional flashback. It just takes you right to that emotional part of the brain for that quick behavior. So yeah, to bring the understanding, like you are dealing when someone is triggered and in an emotional flashback, expressing emotional dysregulation, they don't have access to this. So you can't really reason and logic with them. Like what do people need? What does a child need that's having a temper tantrum? It's usually validation, empathy, compassion. They need you to stay in your power, around someone dysregulated. Two dysregulated people is like the blind leading the blind. Sometimes when we have real deep empathy, we can go into the emotional dysregulation with them, and that's not good. Like compassion is more front mind, to be able to give compassion but not get dysregulated and not feel all the feels they're feeling. And it's hard because I want to say too, like the beauty of having lived through complex trauma, you have deeper emotions than people that haven't, and so that's kind of the gift of the overcoming. I never want to say the gift of the abuse or the trauma, but the gift of the overcoming is depth. You can feel deeper than other people. And then to also sort of have compassion for people that maybe haven't lived through complex trauma and who don't have that same depth. And to I know where I've gotten frustrated in the past, like, why can't that person understand what I'm feeling? And it's because they can't. They don't have that depth, either that they haven't lived through complex trauma and their amygdala is not, the amygdala enlarges. That's hard to say. Amygdala enlarges. So, we have a much bigger capacity for depth and for empathy. So that's sort of the beautiful thing. The other beautiful thing is the brain is plastic, so we can grow that front cortex, that reasoning, logical part of the mind. I will say it's very hard when you're triggered to use that part of your brain if you've lived through complex trauma. But one of the things that has really, really helped me is a program called Free Spira. I'm not affiliated with them at all. I've done the program twice, and it's a drug-free breathing program. It's deep belly breathing to these tones, and it makes it so that your physiology is not so prone to fight or flight. So you can regulate your nervous system more easily. So I've done that program twice. That has really helped me with the emotional dysregulation. So if you can do things when you're not triggered to help just support your nervous system, to make it so that your nervous system is, more supported. I can't think of another thing to say about it other than just supporting it, with breathing, with, being honest when you're not triggered and looking at your life honestly and taking out people that are triggering for you, and that, that's a deep subject too, about going no contact with certain people. It's not an easy thing to do, but sometimes for our mental health and well-being, we need to. So, yeah, I just wanted to come on and share like what emotional dysregulation is and how like from the outside it can look like someone just losing it, but actually they don't have access to part of their brain during those moments, and they're just in the amygdala, the deeply emotional part of the brain, and that it can also be a gift once you've kind of learned how to work with it. I guess I want to give like maybe a couple more tips just too about saying about like working and enlarging that front part of the brain. It's like about learning how to grow up emotionally, and it's not our fault if when we grew up we didn't have someone to teach us how to navigate emotions, and then think too, like once you have complex trauma and you have a really heightened amygdala and you have heightened emotions, you're not just navigating normal emotions. It's like you're not just going out into a little wading pool, you're going out into some big crashing waves and learning how to navigate those. It's hard, so giving yourself compassion, giving yourself understanding. And that's what a good reparenting looks like. That is a way to help regulate the nervous system, to just give yourself compassion and understanding. It'll help lower those emotions. I also noticed that of course, with a very active amygdala, I used very poetic, magical thinking and fantasy and very poetic, very dreamy thoughts, and those really weren't helping me. They are beautiful, and I still like to use them in writing, but keeping like some reality there, and not going too deep into believing fantasy, because that keeps us very away from our front mind. Sorry, getting a scratchy throat, and away from the logic and reasoning, and just kind of caught up in that amygdala, So, all right, I think that's it. I'll just end here. It's long enough. All right, peace out. So, just give compassion for self and others that you see may be dysregulated. And at that moment, they're just really a child without access to the prefrontal cortex. And there are solutions to help mature that part of the brain and get it back online again. And you're left with the depth of emotion, with being able to feel and understand things deeper than people that either haven't lived through complex trauma or have taken another sorry, my throat's so itchy, another way of dealing with the trauma. They may have turned off their empathy, and the amygdala is just not accessed at all. You can see that in people that are kind of on the narcissistic spectrum. So although you'll see their amygdala activated during narcissistic rage, but that's a whole nother video. So, you're left with depth of processing, and that's a beautiful gift to the overcoming. So, take the gift and work on the parts that are hard. All right, peace out.